Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. But America's agriculture landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertising campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food to the store where you buy the final product and everything in between. This is Real Ag. From cotton to Milo, bees to agricultural machinery. It has been a busy year for Real Ag. We visited many farms and many fields. We looked at global food systems and took another look at industrial hemp. Let's take a look at some of the best parts of the 2020 season of Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Global food systems are the production, transportation, packaging, distribution, and consumption of the products we eat on a daily basis. As the population of the world grows, these systems must adapt to keep up with the rising demand. But what must be done to keep up with these growing changes, and how does Kansas fit into these global food systems?
These are really exactly the kinds of things that globally I think we ought to be talking about and exploring. The same way that oil is a global commodity, the same way that many other objects that we rely upon are in a global marketplace, so is food. And I think that's been clear for decades. And there have been a number of experiments tried in other parts of the world in terms of managing food supplies, and those haven't ended well. Particularly Stalin's efforts, for example, in the Soviet days, and Mao's efforts in the 50s and 60s in China. These were really difficult times and illustrated, frankly, that food systems that are highly dependent on the people involved from the earliest stages all the way through to the consumers can drive something in the wrong direction. And I think that that's something that we have to be aware of and recognize that this is a global commodity, and yet at the same time there are local challenges with respect to delivering food locally, managing food locally. And while we may be able to produce enough to feed 9-10 billion people in the next few decades, we may not be able to necessarily manage it and distribute it properly. And so I think of global food systems in a sense that it's the producer, it's the consumer, it's the folks who are in between, it's the shippers, it's the truckers, it's everyone who somehow engages and touches food in one way or another. It's the policymakers. And so we have to think about this, and this is one thing that I think we do really well here at Kansas State, is that we think about global problems in a multidisciplinary way, and that we approach food thinking about it from the policies and the political science aspect of it, the communications and the human science aspect of it, and how we connect with the families that are involved in each of those points along that path. Kansas, of course, is at the center of food, with food being a $40 billion a year industry for the state of Kansas in terms of our contribution to GDP. It really involves everyone. It's not just the producer who, as you note on the interstate, the signs that say every Kansas farmer feeds 155 people and you. Yes, and it's the transportation systems, the hubs. The history of Kansas in the 19th century, of course, was built up around railroads and being able to cross the country, but also being able to move produce from really the breadbasket of the United States out to, at first, the rest of the U.S., but later on the rest of the world. And so we really are at the center of that, and Kansas State University being the land-grant university that was created to generate new knowledge, new ideas, new inventions, but also to share that with the world and to share those opportunities with the world.
It's called pollination. And there's plants that can basically pollinate itself. There's plants that without the bee, they can't make food, like the almond. Without the bee, there's no almond. They also, when they pollinate, they go from flower to flower, which increases yield of alfalfa, watermelon, all kinds of varieties of things. 1/3 of every bite we take, it's been pollinated by the bee. So you think every third bite, that had something to do with the bee. So they basically up production. They say by a half. It's just the pollinating from flower to flower to flower, and that makes things grow. Basically, pollination is what makes this world go around, from alfalfa to all that kind of stuff. They're very, very, very important. The way we do things nowadays with pesticides, herbicides, all that kind of stuff, it's so dangerous to these girls, or these bees, I should say. So trying to find places like I do where it's a lot of grass, not around the monoculture. Monoculture has taken over the world and has taken away the habitat what these bees need to live. So it is very, very important. You know, that's why I love my job every day, because I've got a very important job to do. I've got to keep these girls alive. And if I fail on my job, I feel I fail the whole world. So that being said, I work very hard. I cherish these bees. I mean, it's just not a job. It's a love. And I think that's why we do so good, because we're not in it for the money point. You know, a lot of people go out to California for the almond pollination. So we try to find ways where we can pollinate, like the canola and all that, to where it's a lot more peaceful with the bees. And so they're very important to them. I mean, people I don't really think understand how important they are. There's a lot of people that fear these bees, like are scared to death of them, and they shouldn't be. These bees are very docile. They ain't gonna hurt us, they're just curious what's going on. So with this, I hope this, you know, it puts a learning curve for the people that how serious this is. It does a learning curve on these bees are not as dangerous as people suspect them to be. And so yes, very important to the world.
Well, the soil, of course, is pretty important in terms of looking at the production potential. And that's why on rangeland, we often talk about having different ecological sites, and they aren't all created equal. You know, we have maybe a clay pan soil, for instance. It might produce, a ton per acre on an average year, maybe a little more. And then the higher producing soils, we used to call them loamy uplands, for instance, you're maybe twice that, maybe 4,500 pounds per acre. And so those are differences generally related back to the soil, primarily. So the soils are quite important. How do we maintain those rangelands in particular? Well, the key thing would be stocking rates. There's a lot of factors that we talk about, but the most important one that affects both the longevity of the plant stands, although most of those are perennial species, you know, how the plants respond and how the animals respond, primarily goes back to stocking rate. And stocking rate is just the number of animals per unit time on a given area. But that's by far the most important factor. And you know, as long as we maintain a reasonable or moderate stocking rate, you know, most years that's going to be fine, allows us that to be a sustainable type system. If we happen to get into drought, however, particularly extended droughts, if they last more than a year or two, then you'll see people having to reduce their stocking rates. Otherwise, they'll overuse the land and results in changes in composition, decreased production. The bigger influences is probably in terms on grazing land is how much cover there is. You know, are they eroding or not? And of course that can happen. The Starbuck wildfire, you know, here a couple of years ago, for instance, was in that kind of central southwest part of the state, and a lot of that area was sandy, and those soils they blew for a while with higher winds because of the lack of cover. So you know, that amount of cover probably has a bigger impact on what happens to that soil.
So in 2019, my husband actually came to me and talked about how his brother and him were interested in growing hemp, and if I was interested in joining them with this new adventure. I was a little apprehensive at first. I really didn't know that much about hemp, and so I was like, let me do some reading, let me figure out a little bit more about this crop. And the more I started reading, the more I was excited and became passionate about the potentials of what this crop can do in terms of sustainability and the products that can be produced for the consumer, as well as the potential of the cash crop for the farmer.
We're really just looking for different crops and different ideas on the farm, and you know, with the Farm Bill changing a few years ago and stuff, we're reading and researching and looked at the potential and kind of got some true numbers from some people that have been in the industry, and we took a very small step. It was not a huge gamble. We didn't do anything we couldn't afford to make a mistake on if it didn't work, but last year was a really small step, and this year we stepped it up a little bit with this half a circle of irrigated industrial hemp for the tri-crop. That was the thing we thought was the best, was to get the most output in one crop that we could, so this will actually get 3, potentially 4 uses out of this crop. We just really did a lot of research and studying on what we thought was a great idea, and we hope it is, but in the end it's really a little bit of a gamble, and we're pretty sure it's going to pay off. We're pretty excited about it. Obviously we know farming is very tight these days, but really in the industry you're just always kind of looking to change things or improve things. Maybe the saying, if you're not growing, you're dying, but we were just really looking for options, and it's really something that's more than just farming. Our journey is really about improving things and making some better options, I guess. The industry in a whole is really driven by improving what we have or subsidizing certain things and making, you know, a better environment.
Milo is kind of the term that we call it. I don't know if it's more of a regional deal, but grain sorghum is what I grow. It's a hybrid, and it's used for cattle feed, blended in ethanol, and then I think here the last few years China has been buying it to blend it into some sort of alcohol. This is the full season dry land, planted about mid-May. Same variety as what over there on the irrigated, much taller than the double crop, and about my tallest dry land. This had a rye cover crop in it, then a cover crop was terminated, pre-emergent herbicide was put down, and as you can see, there's still a good number of pigweeds. It was also sprayed over the top with the post-emergent and still didn't kill them. And as you can see, these palmer plants, they don't even put out much leaves. It's all seed. They've just been a nightmare of a weed because their main goal is to reproduce, and one plant left untreated to anything can put up 1 million seeds per plant. So you look at a whole field, that's going to make problems for next year. So this here will be cut. I'll put a cover in it probably next early spring, rye or spring triticale, and then let that grow, and I'll put soybeans into the cover, and hopefully the herbicides, and hopefully we get our dicamba tolerance back for herbicide back for the soybeans. That way it's just another tool that we can have to manage these pigweeds. But for now, it's difficult to be able to manage all these, because I mean they'll just grow straight up until it reaches sun, and that's why I tried to go with the faster growing Milo to help canopy it, but they still, and it's the only weed out here. There's no other weeds, just palmer. We're at my double crop Milo, irrigated. Kind of in this area where we're at, it's actually dry land, but if you look out where it's a little taller, that's the irrigated part. What that means is this was actually wheat last year. It was cut towards the end of June, and this field here was drilled the 4th of July with a early to early medium variety. And as you can see here, we're middle September, and it's headed out. And this is only my second year of doing it. I usually double crop soybeans, but I was getting nematode buildup, and I wasn't seeing the yields out of the soybeans, so trying the double crop milo to see. Last year it got cold on us earlier than usual, so it kind of hurt the test weight, and the double crop did about 75 to 80, which is still, you know, pretty good, basically dry land, but it's also, it's a second crop, and it was sprayed down with your pre-emergence after the wheat was cut, and then fertilized pre-plant, and then drilled, and then I believe I have about 4 passes over it with the irrigation, and I even put it out on some dry land where the moisture was really good to start, so I went ahead and drilled some dry land. Dry land, it's uninsurable, so you don't have, so it's not covered by insurance, so you do take the risk there. But this year in some of those spots looks pretty good for being only rained on 2 or 3 times this year, about 1 inch each. So not a whole lot of moisture there, but yet you still get a second crop out of it. You know, since milo is cut pretty late in the year, it's hard to get in a crop behind it. Like soybeans we would cut in September, October, and we'd have enough time to put wheat into it. Milo's a little more difficult since you're cutting it more towards the end of October, and then it also uses up a lot of nitrogen from the ground, and it's hard to go back in with wheat. So usually go from a milo to a soybean, like this will be soybeans next year, and then after that I go into wheat after I cut the soybeans. But you can use it to fallow. It's also been really good for cattle grazing. I lease this out about every year to cattle for them to graze on the stalks after it's been cut.
I mean, obviously, if you can't put the crop in the ground, you can't harvest it, we don't eat. So on all aspects, it is just as important as the seed itself. If a seed doesn't get to the ground, it doesn't do any better than what's in the bag.
It's critical. We've got our machinery, we've got some unique relationships, we've got some equipment that we own on our own. We've also got our harvest equipment here, the 2 grain carts and the combine are owned in partnership with another friend south of Greensburg. This allows us to share labor and spread the cost of the equipment over more acres. We've got a similar arrangement on a no-till drill that makes owning the quality of equipment we need to operate a lot more feasible for us.
From what I see, there's a very big problem on most operations of finding help, and having an automated system, whether it be on a combine or a tractor, to be able to help labor become just as experienced as a guy that had been running something for 20, 30, 40 years is a very, very big aspect of that. Everything on the farm needs to be done very timely, and help is harder and harder to find all the time. So if we could make that easier on the farmer by having things that are automated or autonomous to where they can take care of themselves as far as the machine goes, the experience of the operator does not have to be as high as it once did. I see automation becoming very prevalent in the next years to come. It's already here. I do think we'll see more of it on the tractor side of things with planting and drilling, to allow planting and drilling throughout the night when an operator may get fatigued, just to try and cover more acres. The number of farmers are growing smaller and smaller by the day, and the acres needed to be covered to keep up with it are growing. So we're gonna have to do something along the lines of be able to run more hours in a day. Give or take the operator and their experience with that machine, you're probably looking at a day or so of actually kind of going through the runs and through the paces. We probably spent a few hours going over the settings and what needed to be done to allow the automation to work properly. But really, as far as most operators, this is a very, very simple setup and would probably not take much time at all to put anybody in the cab and get them very familiar with it.
With the technology that's involved in the equipment and the changes in the tillage practices, when I got out of school got out of high school, wasn't out of college yet, in '92, we were still running a minimum tillage operation, so we kept one guy pretty much busy full-time doing tillage. It wasn't a lot of skilled labor, it was turning dirt. Our operations evolved to where we're doing all of our own, or the majority of our fertilizer application is variable rate applied with a strip till rig. The planters, we're doing variable rate seeding. Just all of the operations are teachable, but you've got to have a person that wants to learn and will do a quality job on a consistent basis. I've been very fortunate. Glenn Summerfeld came to us in 2007. In 2008, we started into our variable rate program. Essentially what we've done is take each field and turn it into 3 to 5 fields, and we manage it accordingly. We apply different rates of fertilizer, different rates of seed, and Glenn has really embraced that technology. He's very patient with the technology when it doesn't work, which is something I'm not some days. So it's been a very good fit, and we've got our equipment sized appropriately to where we can cover a lot of acres with minimal labor.
The machines and operators are an invaluable asset to modern producers, but having the right kind of equipment is just as important. Like having the correct tool for each job, having the right piece of machinery to do that job seems like a no-brainer. But what are some of the different types of agricultural machinery, and what are they used for?
Different types of ag machinery you'll see, at least in our area. We're very, probably broad as far as crops grown. There's a lot of other cereal grains out there, wheat, milo. We're actually becoming into cotton country. We've got a lot of hay equipment out there now, as well as you start looking around too, and this is beef country as well. As far as harvesting goes, a combine can be used on most harvesting needs. Hay equipment would be a little bit different as far as how you would harvest that, but in generalities, be very similar. Foremost, a combine is what we consider a harvester as well. It can be named many different things, but really its primary piece is to take the crop from the field, clean it, and from the combine it'll go into what we call a grain cart. It's what's able to take the grain from the combine and take it to a truck. The big purpose of having a grain cart is to keep your combine productive. Its main objective, like we were talking, is to harvest. So if you take the combine to the truck, you're losing productivity, you're losing dollars. This stuff is so expensive, you've got to keep it running. The tractor is what is hooked in front of the grain cart, and it's more used as a transport device. It's used as moving the grain cart. It can be used for anything from planting, drilling, windrowing. It's a very versatile piece. Most operations have many more tractors than combines. Combines or harvesters have only one purpose, and that's really to harvest the crop itself. Harvest it and clean it. It's not really used anywhere else on the farm. Based on different crops, like today we're harvesting corn, so it'll have a corn head on it. A little bit easier to point out because it's got snouts on the front that allow the corn to feed into the combine. We refer to a lot of other cereal grain heads as platform heads, or a flex head or a rigid head, depending on what crop you're in, for like a wheat, milo, soybean situation.
Yeah, I think the cotton acres, it's been a little up and down, but it's pretty prevalent now across south central and southwest Kansas. I'm sure we're over 100,000 acres. And cotton's been a pretty successful crop. I've talked to ranchers, and maybe been a couple years ago now, where he was almost on the Oklahoma border there in southern Kingman County, I think, and he had had quite a bit of rangeland. That's why I was visiting there, but he also had quite a bit of cropland. He was growing different crops. I think he was growing milo and some corn, and I don't think he had any soybeans there, but his best crop was cotton. And so it's become pretty important. It's not a major crop in terms of the number of acres, like when we think about corn and soybeans and sorghum. Those would be the three big ones. But it's a pretty important secondary crop in that part of the state.
It has grown over the last several years. Acres are down a bit this year for a variety of reasons, but a lot of it has been market driven. There have been, processing cotton is a very specific thing. You can't take it to an elevator like you could take corn or soybeans or milo or wheat. You have to go to a gin to deconstruct cotton into the beneficial products that it produces. We've seen some significant expansions and the construction of new gins in Kansas. That's probably the most positive factor to impact cotton production in the southern tier counties in Kansas, and it's going to trickle over into Oklahoma, over into the Texas Panhandle as well, because it's a mobile crop that can be moved around. But I think we'll continue to see steady to increasing cotton acres.
But a lot of it will just be driven by the market price.
The herbicide tolerance traits have helped reduce the number of applications and amounts of herbicides used. Among these genetically modified versions of cotton, what are some of the other varieties of cotton and what is their breeding?
You know, in this corn and soybean growing area, which we have a kind of a combination of that all around us here, there's more acres of the dicamba tolerant cotton, southwest where they have a lot of wheat fallow. To control that, the weeds in there, there's a tremendous amount of 2,4-D used, and that's about what drove cotton out of the state, was herbicide drift from these other chemical applications. And now that we have these varieties that are tolerant to that, that's why our acreage has gone back up from about 30,000 acres to estimated 195 this year in a matter of about 5 years or 4 years. The companies that are doing the breeding have done a really good job. There's only 4 or 5 major ones. We've probably got about 12 to 18 varieties really that will do well up here. We're not I always refer to Kansas as being part of the cotton bracelet or a bit of the buckle off the belt. We're in the top 10 for acreage in the nation right now. And this little piece of Kansas and Oklahoma, on the northern border of Oklahoma where they didn't used to grow cotton, you put those, the acreage of those two together and they're in the top 8 or 7 states in the nation.
From global food systems to sorghum, it's been an interesting year. We'd like to thank all of the producers, specialists, and other individuals who participated, and we hope you enjoyed this season of Real Ag. As always, you can check out this and other episodes of Real Ag on SmokyHillsPBS.org. From the producers at Smoky Hills PBS, this has been Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.